Welcome to the March Patreon Q&A. First things first, if the audio sounds just like a little weird, it's really windy today around this building. So hopefully that won't leak through, but if it does, I'm really sorry. Second thing, we discussed it amongst the kind of the tier for the Q&A, and we agreed that it would be okay if the answers for the Q&A were shared with other tiers. So maybe you're not in a tier that gets to ask a question, but you can still hear the answer. So I hope that's a good thing. I hope. As part of that, I won't be discussing names of people asking questions, though. That was kind of one of the requests. The question can stand, but we're just not going to attach names to questions. I'm going to start at the top of the thread, the comment thread, and just kind of work my way down the questions I feel I can answer in a reasonable amount of time. So I was asked that someone knows I was into mixed drinks, into cocktails. Do I ever feel that I came across anything that pairs well with coffee? One of my lessons from competition is that actually a staggeringly small number of things pair well with coffee, right? Like the traditional things, be it dairy, be it chocolate, be it nuts, that genuinely pair well, they're one thing, right? So there's a bunch of drinks out there that are very obvious that actually taste pretty good. I've worked with lots of other ingredients over the years. Coffee is just such a blunt object of flavor. Like it's so easily, so completely dominant, or you use so little of it that it may as well not be there, but there's very little in between the two. So I think it's a really difficult ingredient to produce something really great with where it's not the dominant flavor, right? So that's sort of how I feel about cocktails and coffee and mixed drinks. In a discussion with Chris Backer on his podcast, we did discuss areas that coffee professionals aren't as interested in as home baristas, and flow and pressure perhaps being one of these areas. And where do I see the home market going in the next few years? I think the decent is definitely interesting in this regard. It's kind of an outlier right now in so many different ways. And I feel like I'm going to need to keep making videos about that thing because it keeps changing. I recently received like a whole parts update for it and some other stuff, but that's another time. I think home machines will, trend-wise, we're splitting in two ways, right? We're going one side down the Internet of Things, super connected, tons of data management, data logging, and potentially control. And on the other side, there seems to be a real boom in things like the flare, which don't need any electricity, that are just very simple manual espresso makers. Those, seem to be the current trends. In the middle, I don't see as much happening in just the good old-fashioned, pretty simple domestic espresso machine. I guess people like Breville/Sage are doing pretty well in that middle space, but that's drifting towards super automatics, which is kind of interesting. Still, there is a product I'm going to review soon that is an interesting bridge between all of these things. That's all I'm going to say for now, but it is crazy, but it's cool. It's coming. There's a question about cold brew and food safety. And as far as I understand it, if you're worried about food safety with cold brew, pasteurize it. Pasteurization is extremely common in the soft drinks industry. It's incredibly easy to do. You can do it domestically. If you want to, you can do it on a much larger scale with pasteurizing machines. Typically, you bottle up your product pre-labeling, you put it in a pasteurization machine that will hold it at around, I think, 70 degrees Celsius for a period of time that would kill off anything inside the bottles, any sort of potential pathogens or things that would grow and make things disgusting. This is going to change the taste of your product. As a warning, it is going to make it taste different than it would have done before, but it will be food safe at that point. Your other option is to use preservatives, antioxidants in there. However, if you're really looking at this from a commercial perspective, I would probably speak to a food and beverage consultant who will know the legals and the requirements for your particular geography. I'm not an expert, I'm just interested in it. Someone asks about my ratio rant that I gave recently on the YouTube, and they just want some clarification, right? I said it's easier if you brew with a lower dose, so it's easier to brew with, say, 16 grams instead of 18 grams. Why? Should they be brewing 16 grams in an 18 gram basket? If you're having trouble getting balanced espresso from 18 grams in an 18 gram basket, yes, drop your dose. If your 18 gram shots taste great, don't mess with it. There's no need to worry about it. But the lower the dose, the finer you're going to grind to get the similar kind of flow rate, similar kind of brew time, the more surface area you're going to expose by grinding finer. Therefore, the higher extraction you're going to see as a result of that. Therefore, it's kind of, by grinding finer, you're going to extract more, right? So having less coffee ground finer, it's a little easier, even with, a correspondingly lower amount of liquid to brew with. If you keep your ratios the same, right? You might have done 18 to 36 and now it's 16 to 32, but you're still dealing with much, much, much finer ground coffee to get a similar flow rate. What are 3 books I would recommend any coffee lover to read, aside from my own? That is a good question. It really depends what you want from coffee, right? Like, someone suspects The Devil's Cup is one of them. The Devil's Cup is a book by a guy called Stuart Lee Allen. It was the first book I read on coffee. It is travel writing thematically tied to coffee. And if you enjoy travel writing, you will probably enjoy this too. It's not full of great, dense facts about coffee. This is written before specialty coffee was really a thing. But if you want like a little cultural journey and history through coffee spread around the world, it's very interesting. I think if you want some good, dense facts, though written at a time that's sort of problematic because it was, pre-specialty and in the middle of the fair trade crisis, there's Black Gold by Anthony or Tony Wilde. That I would recommend. I did recently receive this, which is Coffee, A Global History by Professor Jonathan Morris, who I've known for a long time, who really I got to know when he was doing a lot of research on the cappuccino like 10, 12 years ago. It is jam-packed full of information in a kind of an impressive way. Like it's borderline overwhelming, but not overwhelming. So that was pretty good. And probably... again, history and context, if that's your thing. Uncommon Grounds by Mark Pendergrast is pretty great, specifically about the US. Less relevant if you're outside of the US. And then, if you're actually going to read it, which most people don't, then the Illy Science of Quality book is expensive, but it is jam-packed full of information that I feel like... I regularly have conversations where I'm surprised people aren't aware of this because they actually haven't gone in and read the book. It's dry, it's pretty scientific, it's about Italian espresso more than it's about espresso generally, but it is very good. I had like a little man crush, like a scientific man crush, I guess. I'd never met him, on a guy called Marino Petracco, who kind of headed up Illy's science for a long time. He seemed to just have so many answers to so many questions that I wanted to know. Someone says, I recall you being quite critical in the past about coffee in capsules. Has anything changed since then? Any capsule or capsule-like technologies that I'm aware of that sound promising? Or do I think about Maxwell, who's Colonna Dashwood of Colonna Coffee, his experiments in producing Nespresso-compatible specialty coffee capsules? I get why capsules are so successful. They are, when it comes to espresso at home, so quick, clean, and easy. But they are like microwave meals, right? So they're expensive, they're not particularly great, and it's much easier to make something much more delicious if you've got a little bit of time and energy, and it's actually cheaper to do it that way. And so that's microwave food to regular home-cooked food, and that's Nespresso capsules to espresso at home. Though espresso at home is a little bit messier and more demanding of equipment. That said, I know Maxwell pretty well, so I probably have a little bias in that. He's producing some pretty good tasting capsules. For capsules, like you can taste the coffee that went into them, clearly. Specialty coffee probably suffers at the hands of needing good brewing water more than commercial coffee does, right? So having a capsule be a little bit funny tasting because your water's a bit funny tasting. With specialty, that flaw is magnified. So that still remains a challenge to overcome. I think the waste question is still a real question to answer. Like the endless pods. No one will give any data about how many pods are actually recycled, right? The Nespresso pods can be recycled. Very few other people are able to get their capsules into the aluminium ones. That's slowly starting to change. The plastic ones just don't work as well. It's a great business example to me, right? Nespresso had a patent that they could defend for 25 years, and they built and owned that market completely. And when that patent lapsed, anyone could pack their coffee into capsules. And so everyone sort of has. And no one has a defendable product. No one has any sort of competitive advantage. Most people are using third-party companies to pack their coffee into pods, and so anyone can come and get their coffee packed into pods. No one really has a real strong competitive edge, and I don't see any specialty player particularly dominating within that market segment. So I get it, it's not for me, but I get it. Somebody asks what I do for water for home brewing, considering I'm in London and the water for coffee in London out of the tap, while tasting fine, sucks for coffee. I usually bring water home from work. I'll just take a 5-litre bottle and fill it up and use it over and over and over again. I have experimented a little bit with third wave water. I'm still experimenting. At some point we'll review that product. It's sort of interesting, but not particularly convenient. And occasionally, if I'm in a pinch, I will buy like decent bottled water. Some of their very cheap bottled water around me is pretty good. It's actually from where I'm from, the Lake District, and it brews okay. Like, it's not flawless, but it's pretty good to work with, and it's very cheap. It's still plastic, it's still waste. I'm not really cool with that, so I try and avoid doing that as much as possible. And yeah, sometimes, oh no, London tap water. Not often though, it's not good. It's not good. Someone asks about my current pour-over method and how I feel about Tetsu's 4-6 method. There will be a video on pour-overs at some point. I'm in need of a full-blown... Okay, here's the deal. The reason that video hasn't happened yet is because in working on it, I've ended up with way more questions than I have answers for. And there's a bunch of stuff that I actually just want to test properly. Now, this studio space is okay for brewing a cup or two of coffee now and again. It sucks for doing any real experimentation. As you might know, Square Mile recently moved their facility, and as part of that we've built a new one. But one of the last rooms to be finished is our training and QC kind of room. When that room is done, I have time allocated and people to come and help me run a whole host of experiments so I can answer some questions that are really bothering me about pour-overs and come out with some pretty solid, I hope, backed up opinions about other people's methods, be it Tetsu's, be it Scott Rayo's. There's a few out there. So I just want to do this right. And that's taking me longer than I want it to, but I'm going to do it right. I know it's annoying. I know I keep talking about it. I know it's just always next month. Next month is always pushed back. This is why. That's the deal. Please forgive me. Interesting question. What are my opinions on Turkish coffee and why has it not become mainstream? It's a good question. I don't really drink or come across Turkish coffee very often. As you note, it's not in the mainstream. I've never really had that seminal Turkish coffee experience yet. I haven't had that like, oh wow, this is wow. That's just not happened for me yet. I've only experimented with a few times. It's not something I know a great deal about. I remember in the past reading about a cultural preference or tolerance for bitterness and how different cultures and countries have different appreciations of bitterness, and parts of the world that drink this style of coffee having that higher bitterness tolerance than I might have. That said, I'm not ruling it out. I just haven't had that experience yet. I should probably look into that. So thank you for giving me a nudge to go and explore that thing a little bit more. Okay, there's a question about what's the best way to test coffee side by side at home. If you want to experiment, let's say on one particular variable, let's say grind size, then brew number 1 will often be cold when brew number 2 is pretty much finished. Now, how am I doing this kind of experimentation at home? How am I able to do this? Do I have multiple setups? In some cases, I'll do multiple pours at the same time. That's not too difficult to do if you're used to doing staggered pours. In some cases, I'll do some objective testing, stuff like TDS, which is not particularly available to most people. And in other cases, I'm just pretty happy to let the whole thing go cold, everything to go cold, or cool at least, right? Because those differences will become actually much more magnified in a cold cup than they will in a hot cup. They may not be at their most delicious, but you'll clearly taste the impact of your experiments. Right, so actually letting them cool down, letting them both hang out at room temperature for a while, that's in these situations where it's really about experimentation and not necessarily about drinking one of them at the end of it, that's actually going to be much more revelatory, right? You're just going to get all of the differences much more clearly because it's easier to taste liquids closer to body temperature. In terms of tasting coffee side by side, I am going to do, in the not too distant future, a guide to cupping coffee at home. There's something very silly and ridiculous behind that, but there will be there will be a guide to cupping coffee at home soon as well, which isn't really what you asked, but I thought I should throw it out there at this point. Question: how do I talk to my customers who inquire about organic coffee? I know shops that only sell organic, but I also know organic certifications are expensive for smaller farms. This is really, there's a truth to this that's not particularly great. We've never really dealt with certified organic stuff, primarily because the certification in the UK is so completely absurd and nonsensical that we've just never wanted to get involved, and we get very little in the way of demands for organic coffee. I'm not against organic coffee whatsoever. I'm pro-organics. I think that's definitely a good thing, not from a taste perspective, where I don't believe it has any real impact on taste. Certainly in most agricultural products, it's just ideally a better way to farm from an ecological impact perspective, but it isn't really about taste. By and large, if they really want organic, I would send them to another roaster that does organic and does it well. That's not a great answer, I'm sorry, but that is unfortunately my truth. Question asked: someone has several responsibilities financially, a passion for coffee, a desire to do good or ethical work. They're leading a cafe for an established roaster. They've worked in coffee for 4 years. They're pushing themselves in competitions. They eventually want to open their own roaster/cafe. That may be many years away. They've worked under a couple of champions. They've learned a lot, but their parents are getting older. Their college debt is growing. They wonder if they might serve their family better by getting a job in the tech industry, which they have experience in. Did I find a time in my coffee career when I faced similar questions of switching professions? What do you think plays into sticking with a career in specialty coffee, and what does that look like these days? Okay, there's a video I think going live probably around the same time as this one, where I briefly talk about the value of skill sets outside of coffee right now. I would say a bunch of tech experience should and could make you way more valuable to coffee companies that will that are looking for to become more established, to grow more. I think we're getting to a time when certainly if you want to stay in coffee companies are starting to hire non-coffee professionals more and more, and to be a pretty good web developer who really understands specialty coffee makes you more valuable to a coffee company than a great front-end developer who really doesn't understand coffee that much, who doesn't understand the customers, who doesn't have much empathy for people who buy the product, because that all kind of factors in. I think the better salaries, the better opportunities are beginning to sort of pop up for people with broader skill sets. I'm not saying don't dedicate yourself to learning coffee, and I talk about this in the video. I think it's huge value to really knowing coffee, but I think increasingly I'm seeing a value in having a slightly broader skill set and to be able to bring an outside skill set into coffee, because we desperately need it. As these businesses are growing, I've certainly gone through this where suddenly, for a long time I only really needed to hire people who knew about the same sort of stuff that I did, and that made hiring very easy, training pretty easy. But as we needed to have dedicated marketing people or online retail people or, finances, shockingly enough, like all of this stuff requires outside skill sets. But if it comes with a solid bedrock of understanding of coffee, that's super valuable. I don't necessarily like that this is the way things are, but I look at the jobs in the markets that I understand, and I look at the higher salaries, and that's the kind of thing that I'm seeing. Question: are there any future innovation/business developments that I'm really excited about? At the moment, no, if I'm honest. We feel like we're in a weird time where innovation sort of slowed a little bit, and I think we're going through obviously consolidation. There's challenges with businesses making money or others growing and acquiring others. It doesn't feel like a period of pure innovation the way that we felt like that in the past. I'm not seeing that in equipment. I'm not really seeing that in roasting. I'm not really seeing that in sourcing either much, which makes it right now a very fertile ground to start to have opportunities and really gain a competitive advantage. I'm just not seeing much in the way of R&D from most big companies, be it coffee roasting companies, be it equipment companies. I'm just not seeing a whole host. I know the stuff that I'm involved in, but outside of that, I don't really know. So at the moment, I'm kind of looking forward to seeing some events like Host or like World of Coffee this year, where I might stumble on something exciting. There's little things that are exciting, but in terms of a big macro thing, I don't know. I don't think I don't think I could say one thing that's really got me like, yes, about anything. Doesn't sound good. I'm excited about stuff, but I don't think I have a good answer for this question. Okay, this is I like this question. I'm going to read the whole thing. What's with the big difference in extraction levels between competition Aeropress recipes and everything else? World champions do things like coarse grind, 85-degree water, 1 minute 30 brew times with enormous ratios to compensate. Surely that can't give anything like a 20% extraction. Is this just a case of Aeropress people being weirdos? No, it's a case of playing the flaws in humans, I think. Like, I've judged a few Aeropress championships. I think I've judged a world or two. I don't always find myself in agreement with other judges. And I think that when you're tasting quickly a bunch of cups, the biggest, brightest, almost caricature-like cup can often do well, which to me I don't particularly enjoy, right? Like, I really dislike unbalanced acidity. I really dislike under extraction. I don't particularly like low temperature brews of light roasted coffees. Like, I feel like they have a sort of quality that I get to them, but they're just missing a piece of the puzzle for me. So I don't enjoy them as much as other people do. But I've cupped with people who just love them, right? They really, really enjoy those low temperature brews. They stick out like a sore thumb to me, but that's just me, right? But I think that's the game, right? You just need to be better than the two other cups on your table, or you just need to be picked. You need to appeal. You need to stand out. And often a really harmonious, super balanced cup doesn't stand out the way that a big, bright, crisp, zingy, like, kind of cup stands out. So I think that's a big part of it. It's just what judges tend to pick in those situations. I think if you made the judges finish 3 cups of coffee and pick one, you'd get a very different winner from those kind of rounds. I'm not saying the judges are bad. It's a high pressure environment. It's difficult. You're tasting a huge amount of coffees in a day, but I think that's basically what's going on. I'm not a huge fan of those kind of brews. I don't want to drink more than a couple of mouthfuls before I get blown out by acidity and that kind of drying astringency of under extraction, and I'm done. That kind of tannic, nah. It's just me. That's just what I like. Your opinion may vary, and that's okay. I mean, it's wrong, but it's okay. Quick one. For coffees that don't come with a zip tie or tin tie on the bag, what's the best way to keep them? Transfer them to an airtight container or something else? I would say yes, put them in an airtight container. I would generally prefer that to the open bag. Practically, yes, it will preserve it a little bit more. I know that every time you open the bag, you introduce fresh oxygen, but if it's dark, dry, and airtight, that's pretty good. It's certainly better. And secondly, the thing that bothers me about bags without that kind of stuff is the spill opportunity. For me, clumsy at 6 a.m. is high. I like things that I can't spill easily, like containers with lids. That's just me. Yeah, there's more. I have another rant on this topic coming up, but I'm doing a bunch of experiments at the moment to sort of have a better opinion than I do right now. A quick one that's sort of tied to before. There seems to be a pretty low ceiling for work in coffee. And in my short 5 years, it seems that people either get out of coffee or to make money, or they start their own ventures, cafe or roastery or what have you. This person works in a relatively small roastery in the US. They wouldn't say they've reached that ceiling, but it seems like those two things happen. The question is it worth it to start your own thing just out of trying to make more money? Does it always have to be like this in the current coffee economy? So I think it has touched back on something I talked about earlier, which is there are new jobs and higher salaries and that kind of stuff opening up in larger companies that are trying to scale and do more and become, I guess, a little bit more grown up in their approach. Most people who start businesses lose money doing so, or basically break even and make barely minimum wage for the number of hours that they put in. If you're going to start your own business, maybe there's a separate video here of like things you should do. Having worked in coffee is one, but actually really have a solid financial model about how and why you're not going to be just destroyed by a very competitive market right now. There's never been a worse time to open a cafe. There's never been a better time to be a coffee consumer, but there has never been a worse time to open a cafe, right? Like questionable economic strength in various markets around the world, but never has there been more competition than there is right now. Right? Like you've just never had so many businesses competing for the same customer. It is brutal right now to start your own thing. Same with roasters. Like there probably has been as many coffee roasters. There's never been this many specialty roasters. So yeah, starting your own thing is definitely not a guaranteed way to make more money. Broadening your skill set and deepening your coffee skill set and progressing in various businesses that have these kind of new opportunities, I think is probably a better way to break through that very just pure coffee work ceiling that you kind of mentioned. Question, how important is a coffee variety to its taste profile? I feel like from a consumer's perspective, it's often not clearly communicated from coffee professionals other than Geshe having its own thing. They read Gece Bekele and Tim Hill's book on Ethiopian coffee varieties, and it was fascinating to learn about. The Jimma Agricultural Research Center, they came away feeling that variety is primarily important to coffee producers. Are they missing something? No, you're actually not. You kind of nailed it there. Variety choice really is down to livelihood. It's nothing to do with taste almost all the time. Most varieties don't express taste profiles consistently. Some need specific conditions to genetically express that taste profile, but very rarely does a variety have a guaranteed taste of variety. What you choose might be about yield, it might be about how easy it is to harvest a tree. You know, Katura is a great example of a tree that grows to about 2 meters tall, meaning that you're always going to be able to pretty much reach all of the fruit on the tree. That makes it a popular choice. Other trees do grow higher. Some varieties, you think about varieties like Castillo in Colombia, that's really just about surviving leaf rust, right? Like that's a very financially motivated decision, and they've done a lot of work to improve the taste profile so as not to damage the value of the product afterwards, but it is still primarily about what is the smartest thing for me to grow, and that's not always about taste. And in many ways, post-harvest process for most producers is about what's the most effective way for me to process this coffee that is the least likely to introduce defects and damage the value of my crop. Not which will give me the sparkliest, crispest acidity. That's just not how it works. That's a good question. Okay, I'm just going to do a few more. This video is getting a little bit long. What are the differences between an espresso roast and a filter roast in detail? Why are these differences required? And how would you rebut the arguments of omni roasters? Hey, so here's the thing. It's kind of a philosophy, right? Like I will accept omni roasters that the coffee tastes how they want it to, right? As long as they're executing their vision, they just have a different taste philosophy to me. And that's okay. I don't have to like everyone's coffee, and you don't have to like everyone's coffee, and not everyone has to like the way that I like it. Just as long as enough people like it, then I might have a sustainable business. Primarily, there's two differences for us in sort of roast profiles. Now, I'm hesitant to put roast profiles up on the screen. One, because I haven't talked to the roasters first, and two, because that roast profile is relevant to that particular machine in that particular environment with that particular gas supply, blah, 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 blah. Roast profiles on things like a UG15 Probat do not transfer very well, right? So just because we adjust gas here doesn't mean you should. Just because we see this rate of rise here doesn't mean you should. So I'm going to stay away from that. Our espresso roasts are slower. They have a longer period of development time post first crack, as well as a sort of slower run into first crack as well. And they will typically end at very slightly higher temperatures. Beyond that, there's no hard and fast rule about anything, actually. The way that we will accomplish that will vary coffee to coffee to coffee. We're ending up with something that is more soluble than it would be, because frankly, brewing an espresso is very difficult. You don't have much solvent, you don't have much water, you don't have much time. In filter coffee, you've got loads of solvent and loads of time. And so actually extracting at that higher level is easier with lighter roast than it would be in an espresso machine. Maybe that's not the detail you were after. I will talk to my roasting team and see if they're happy to talk more about that, and maybe we'll get some charts and graphs up on the screen and do a little video that way. But I would really want to present their expertise, not mine, because they're much better at roasting than I will ever be. So that's that one. Just a quick one, penultimate question here. The siphon brewer. I've been using the siphon brewer a lot to brew coffee lately. What's the best method of cleaning it? And what's the best method to clean the filter and store the filter? When should I replace the filter? So the last time I brewed siphons in any real number was actually way back in 2010, when we had Penny University, which was like a little pop-up project for 3 months, and I brewed many siphons back then. We switched to paper filters pretty early on, right? You can get the little adapter. It needs a little bit of kind of messing around with to get it to sit nicely and not to get any kind of bubbling up one side when your water's kicked up. In terms of cleaning the brewer, first things first, get the coffee out of there as fast as you can as soon as it's brewed, right? Like, don't serve coffee in the globe thing at the bottom. That glass is so hot that it sort of degrades the coffee a little bit for me, and it keeps the coffee so hot. I just don't like it. So for me, I'm like, get that thing emptied and then get it cleaned, rinsed out straight away. Like, we found a little soap and water straight away, cleaned up very easily. What we would do when we were using cloth, and we were using cloth brewers as well in the kind of the drip pots, which used cloth as well. So again, as quickly as possible to get the physical coffee material out, as many fines out, that kind of inside out rinse as possible. We would then just store them in water during the day. At the end of every day, they would go into some espresso machine cleaning stuff. We use the Ernex stuff, the full circle, which is organic, non-toxic, all that kind of stuff. Just a little bit of that into hot water, and we would leave the cloths in that overnight. Ernex was originally developed to clean cloths for giant commercial cloth coffee brewers, right? So it's not weird that this espresso machine cleaner is used for cleaning cloths. That's the root of the product's history. So we always liked that. It took a good amount of rinsing every morning to really make sure it was clear of any detergent taste. And we would brew a couple of brews just to make sure they were tasting clean. It's a lot of work. No question, it's a lot of work, but attacking it as fast as possible is definitely a win. That's true of most cleaning in life, right? But that's Siphon cloths or any cloth brewers and me. Last question. I've talked a lot. My voice is going to go. Does specialty coffee want to impose terroir on consumers as the end goal of good and proper tasting coffee? Is there recognition that the majority of consumers actually prefer a loss of terroir for that roasty flavor? Here be opinions. I would argue that underdeveloped coffee masks terroir as much, if not more, than slightly too dark coffee, like slightly roasty coffee. I certainly find it less pleasant to drink, especially in a paper-filtered brew. Look, I think what we're chasing is characteristics that are clear enough that we can be like, see, this is why this is more expensive, because it tastes different, it tastes complex, it tastes unlike the coffee from a different place, and that's why it's valuable, right? The diversity aspect of specialty coffee is really where its value lies. I think that's probably true, and so I think, you know, we are probably a little narrow in our window of what is a good expression of terroir. You know, I think we're probably a little blinkered in that. I think there are certainly coffees that express terroir very well, while are still sort of more developed roasts. You know, I don't necessarily like a darker roasted Kenya, but it still tastes unlike anything else. You know what I mean? Like, it gets to like really heavy, boozy, dark fruits, but I don't know anywhere else that has that taste of place roasted that way. Right, you know, and when you roast stuff like really good yergs a little bit darker, yeah, you drive away a lot of that tea-like delicate, you know, nuance, but again, you end up with something that still has a uniqueness to it, even if it doesn't have the kind of crazy acidity and brightness that some people may find difficult to enjoy. I said, I'm not advocating for we should all be roasting darker, right? Like, you got to do what you want to do. You got to do the stuff that you're excited about and you really want to drink. But I don't know, like, I just can't say that we've destroyed terroir in these darker roasted coffees when you still actually have quite a strong taste of place. That's it. That's the last question. I am sorry if I didn't answer your question this time around. I did my best to jump through as many as I could without making this incredibly long, and it is incredibly long already. The audio version will be posted about the same time if you just want to watch this, also just want to listen to this as an MP3. If you have listened along with me, thank you so much. I'm sorry I talk so fast. I just want to get a lot done. As always, thank you for your support. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you have a great day.